Cinematic universes are all the craze right now, with the MCU, the DCEU, the Conjuring Universe, the Monsterverse, of course the Riverdale Universe, so it only seemed natural that Universal Pictures wanted to get in on the action and create the Dark Universe, an interconnected universe of films involving all sorts of monsters and dark creatures of the night. Their first film in this franchise was going to be a reboot of The Mummy, the classic 90s action comedy horror film starring the one and only Brendan Fraser. But this reboot wouldn't star Mr. Fraser, it would be starring Tom Cruise. Well, that's a bit strange, but who knows, maybe it'll be good.
Oh my goodness!
Universal Pictures released this very strange photoshopped photo promising that all of these different renowned actors would be portraying different famous monsters in their own movies, and since they would all be connected, they will of course eventually be a team-up movie bringing in all the different monsters together. This was never confirmed, I'm just assuming. This wasn't the first time that we would see a lot of these monsters and characters appear on our screens. Monster movies like Dracula and the Wolfman go as far back as the 1930s and 40s. There have been countless remakes and reimaginings of these films and these stories, and all of them were met with some degree of success. A reimagining of Dracula came out in 2014 with the title of Dracula Untold. It was more of an action and fantasy film rather than a true horror film, and it was supposed to be the first entry of the Dark Universe, and it still might be depending on who you ask, as the film did go through extensive reshoots to try and have it be the beginning of the Dark Universe, though all of these scenes were either scrapped or deleted. So instead of trying to decide whether or not Dracula Untold was part of the Dark Universe or not, Universal went ahead with an official entry in the franchise, The Mummy. The Dark Universe received a bit of hate when it was first announced, so it was The Mummy's job to shut everyone up and prove that this universe can work. But The Mummy did anything but that. The 1999 version of The Mummy was a charming and humorous action-adventure that had some horror elements blended together very well with the action and comedy. Now, I can't tell you how people liked it back in the day, but I can tell you that around my household, The Mummy was cherished for the movie that it was. Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell was a cool action hero that was on the same level as Indiana Jones for me. Growing up, I realized that The Mummy had a very similar effect to all the 90s kids that grew up watching the movie. It was incredibly fun and didn't take itself too seriously. After the success of The Mummy, the director Stephen Sommers was tasked with bringing another monster movie to life in 2004's Van Helsing, starring Hugh Jackman. This is another movie that I think, while not quite as popular or well received as The Mummy, was great at mixing action, horror, and comedy all together in a film. This and The Mummy also had something in common that The Mummy 2017 lacked, and that's fun. These movies didn't take themselves seriously and just went out to tell a cool story that audiences would enjoy. Just look at the synopsis for the plot of Van Helsing. The famed monster hunter is sent to Transylvania to stop Count Dracula, who is using Dr. Frankenstein's research and a werewolf for nefarious purposes. Is that absolutely ridiculous? Yes. Do I love every second of it? Absolutely I do. So obviously a reboot would want to keep the same tone and tell a story that isn't too serious but a very fun and sometimes scary action-adventure movie, right? The movie tries very hard to take itself so seriously but then use humor in situations that just don't land or make the tone feel very conflicting. Tom Cruise does a fine job and makes the action sequences cool at the very least, but that can only go so far. It also tries extremely hard to set up the Dark Universe at the expense of telling the story at hand. Hence, this is the first and only movie in the Dark Universe. So after one very mediocre film, the Dark Universe came to an end. But after watching The Mummy, I couldn't help but feel like with some tweaks to the story and script, bringing in Brendan Fraser, it could be a very interesting start to a very interesting universe. Now, I like monster movies and all these famous monsters anyway, so I am the target audience for these types of films, but this universe could have and should have been something great. I think there's a few different ways that the Dark Universe could have gone. I'm going to go over the two most likely options I can think of and explain why they would and wouldn't work. For the first option, which I think is the more likely of the two, we would have movies of the same tone as Dracula Untold and The Mummy. Now, it's not a bad thing that these films had this tone. It's very possible to blend action, horror, and comedy together. There's movies that exist that do that successfully, but they just weren't done justice in these two films. Reimagining stories can actually be a very unique tool for a remake. I know this is a completely different genre, but Modern Warfare 2019 came up with a different story using characters we've already known from the previous Modern Warfare series, and while we know the roles these characters served in the previous story, they could be entirely different in this new version, and I think that opens a lot of intriguing possibilities. If they had gone this route, would I expecting these films to be cinematic masterpieces? No, absolutely not, but not every movie has to be. Marvel movies for me are, with a few exceptions, just very relaxing and fun movies to shut your brain off and watch. If I had a good time and had a few laughs during a Marvel movie, then I consider it a success. The Dark Universe could have been the exact same thing. If I watch one of the movies, see a few cool action scenes, and maybe a few horrific monster killings, then that's mission accomplished, and I want to see another one, and eventually see all these monsters come together in one movie. There would be no way to bring Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, the Phantom of the Opera, and all these other films into a cohesive universe without it being a bit silly. All of these films take place across different time periods, so how would they ever even mix together, if at all? Again, there was never any plans to have them be mixed together. I'm just assuming that would be the plan, and judging off of Russell Crowe's Henry Jekyll, the plan was definitely going to have all these monsters come together. Seeing all these different monsters fight each other or fight something else would be so cool if it was done correctly. It wouldn't just have to be like a cheap movie, they could absolutely put money into this universe and make the movies look good. Sure, Dracula Untold and The Mummy didn't find their footing, but it doesn't make the task impossible. So that's the route that I think that the Dark Universe was going to follow, and if it hadn't been canceled, then we would definitely see all these movies be these action, adventure, fantasy films. But I think there's another option that's equally as possible, and that's the modern horror route. Over the past few years, horror movies have made a huge comeback from where they used to be. With horror directors like Ari Aster, Robert Eggers, Jordan Peele, James Wan, and Mike Flanagan, horror is on the rise and coming back in style. The Dark Universe would be aptly named to be a conduit to show us all these classic monster movies with modern horror directors, giving us some intensely scary versions of iconic horror monsters. Each of these directors has proven time and time again that they are masters of their craft, and with the inspiration they've been giving plenty of other budding horror directors, their styles and visions are going to pioneer the future of the horror genre. The Dark Universe could harness their capabilities and make a cinematic universe that completely commits to the horror aspects of the films. Now, how would these films interconnect together? In my opinion, if they followed this route, they probably wouldn't. Like I said earlier, there would be no way to bring in all these different horror monsters with stories that would take place in completely different parts of the world, all together in a film without it being a bit silly. If they were to go the full-blown horror route, I can't really imagine a way to tie everything together. Of course, it wouldn't be impossible. There is already a cinematic universe of horror films that are all interconnected in a cool way with the Conjuring Verse. Keep an eye out for my video on that. In the Conjuring Verse, the through line of interconnectivity is Ed and Lorraine Warren. They may not be in every single film, but the hauntings in each movie all eventually lead to Ed and Lorraine. If the Dark Universe wanted to have a through line to connect them all together, then who would be better than Van Helsing, the Monster Hunter? He wouldn't have to be in every movie, but he could conceivably visit and occasionally kill some of these famous horror monsters in his own film. They could make a Dracula film, and then a Van Helsing film, and then maybe even a Van Helsing versus Dracula film if they wanted to. Maybe this is seeping into action movie territory, but it wouldn't necessarily have to either. Connecting all the movies together in a broad way would be very hard, but they could very easily make the movies all connected in theme and tone, with maybe a hint or a character appearance that would link them all together. The failure of the Dark Universe is due to Universal Pictures hatching an idea to make a lot of money and sending out a project that was only half formed. Had they taken their time, mapped out their universe, or even just their first phase of films, giving them the care and attention they need, then the Dark Universe could very well be alive and thriving at this current moment. But sadly, all we got was The Mummy 2017, and the Dark Universe is an experiment that failed miserably. If you want to hear a list of movies that they were planning on making after The Mummy 2017, they were going to make The Invisible Man starring Johnny Depp, then a reimagining of Bride of Frankenstein with Javier Bardem playing the monster and Angelina Jolie playing the bride. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was eyed to star in The Wolfman, Channing Tatum was in talks to star as Van Helsing, but after the total financial disaster that was The Mummy, the universe was cancelled. Blumhouse eventually went on to make The Invisible Man, which was actually very well done, but not trying to tie itself into the Dark Universe at all. In fact, director Leigh Whannell went out of his way to tell us that it's not set in the Dark Universe. This doesn't necessarily mean that we'll never see any of these movies come to light, they just won't be part of the Dark Universe. The Invisible Man is already out and is definitely a more successful film than The Mummy was. Ryan Gosling is going to star in The Wolfman, and I'm sure many of these other films will eventually get made, and it's hard to imagine any of them doing worse than The Mummy did. What are your thoughts on the Dark Universe? Do you think that a universe like this could have worked, or was it doomed from the very start? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like and subscribe to see more videos about connected universes. If you do, then I'll see you in the next one.